The courtroom was filled with an uncomfortable, heavy silence, broken only by the occasional cough or shuffle of papers. A sense of quiet anticipation permeated the room, mingling uneasily with the scent of polished wood and stale air. In the defendant's chair sat a young black man, Thean Hale. His deep brown eyes stared calmly ahead, unwavering but tired, his posture rigidly straight, betraying none of the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. His thin frame was clad in a slightly oversized dark suit, clearly borrowed, worn with dignity despite its evident age. Across from him, Prosecutor Reed Ambrose adjusted his silk tie, clearly confident and relaxed. Ambrose's crisp white shirt contrasted sharply with Thean's worn appearance, underscoring the vast divide between the defendant and those who wielded power in the small Texan town of Sandy River. Ambrose was a respected figure here, admired by the townsfolk, deeply rooted in influential circles. In stark contrast, Thean was seen as an outsider, a misfit whose past had already been marked with suspicion. At the judge's bench sat Edmund Wakefield, a middle-aged man with graying hair, known equally for his sharp intellect and his ruthless streak of sarcasm. His black robe gave him an imposing air, an aura of unquestionable authority. Wakefield had long presided over Sandy River's courtroom, wielding the law as if it were his personal weapon, occasionally tempering justice with favoritism towards the town's powerful residents. Wakefield glanced at the paperwork in front of him, raising his eyebrows skeptically. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Leaning forward slightly, he directed his sharp gaze towards the young man seated quietly below him. "So, Mr. Hale," Judge Wakefield began, his voice resonant yet condescending, "you do realize the gravity of the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thean responded clearly, maintaining respectful eye contact. His voice, though firm, hinted at exhaustion, a weariness stemming not only from this courtroom battle but from years spent fighting invisible adversaries. "Yet, you appear here without legal counsel. Is there some rational explanation for your decision to represent yourself? Surely, you must understand the folly of proceeding without professional defense." The judge's tone, lightly mocking, elicited a ripple of muted laughter from some corners of the room. Thean felt heat rise at the back of his neck but suppressed any visible reaction, drawing on the discipline instilled in him by years of self-restraint. "Your Honor, with all due respect," Thean responded carefully, articulating each word with precision, "my decision to represent myself is based purely on necessity. I have neither the funds nor the privilege to secure a competent lawyer. However, I am confident in my understanding of the law and prepared to defend myself thoroughly." Wakefield's smirk deepened, clearly amused by the boldness of Thean's claim. He glanced briefly at Ambrose, exchanging a knowing look of disdain. "Very well, Mr. Hale," Wakefield said dismissively, leaning back in his chair with a casual wave. "Proceed at your own peril. The court will hear the prosecution's opening statement first." Ambrose rose elegantly from his chair, buttoning his suit jacket, effortlessly commanding attention from the jury and audience alike. He took measured steps towards the jury box, his expression solemn, calculated, radiating confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ambrose began, his voice rich and persuasive, "today we are gathered here because of a violent and unprovoked attack that has shaken our community. The victim, Eric Marsden, was brutally assaulted and left severely injured. We have eyewitnesses, clear testimony, and compelling evidence, all indicating unequivocally that the attacker seated here today is none other than Thean Hale." Thean maintained his neutral expression, though inside, anger simmered, an anger born from injustice, from knowing he was innocent yet facing a carefully constructed lie. He recognized Eric Marsden's name immediately, a wealthy, privileged man, connected to the town's ruling families, whose true character was hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. Thean knew that the evidence was fabricated, that eyewitness testimonies had been manipulated. But how to prove it? Ambrose continued smoothly, building an elaborate picture of Thean as aggressive, unstable, and dangerous. Each word twisted the truth further, cementing prejudice into certainty for many present. Thean observed the jurors closely, reading their faces, skepticism, uncertainty, hostility. He swallowed hard but steadied his breath. He could not afford despair now. His chance to speak would come. "Thank you," Ambrose concluded confidently, returning to his seat after painting Theon as a villain without redemption. The courtroom was silent again. Judge Wakefield turned his gaze to Theon once more, a look of skeptical impatience on his face. "Mr. Hale," he said sharply, "you may now present your opening statement." Taking a deep breath, Theon stood slowly, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Every eye was fixed upon him, scrutinizing each movement, each word. For a moment, memories rushed back, another courtroom, another day, when he had lost everything. His reputation, his education, his dreams, all stripped away by false accusations similar to today's. But he shook off the memories. Now was not the time for self-pity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Theon began softly, gathering strength as he continued, "the prosecution has painted me as a violent criminal. But I stand here today not only innocent but prepared to show that this case is built entirely upon deception, prejudice, and falsehoods." Wakefield barely concealed a smirk, amused by the bold claim. Several jurors exchanged skeptical glances. Ambrose looked quietly confident, smiling slightly in amusement. Unfazed, Theon continued, his voice growing stronger and more assertive with each sentence. "Yes, it's true, I am representing myself, not by choice, but out of necessity. I have no wealth, no influence in this town. But what I do possess, Your Honor, is the one thing that matters most in this courtroom: truth, backed by knowledge of the law." The judge raised an eyebrow skeptically, visibly unimpressed, yet Theon pressed onward. "I assure this court that before this trial concludes, you will see beyond your assumptions, beyond prejudices, and recognize the painful truth: I am here today not because I committed a crime, but because I am the convenient target for those who fear what genuine justice might uncover." An uneasy silence spread throughout the room. Ambrose's confidence momentarily wavered, and Wakefield shifted uncomfortably. For a brief instant, a hint of uncertainty flickered through the judge's eyes, quickly replaced by his usual indifference. As Theon sat back down, he felt a strange rush of empowerment. Though alone and disadvantaged, he knew this moment was the start, not the end, of a battle he'd waited years to fight. The courtroom had already dismissed him as just another hopeless case, yet Theon understood something crucial that they didn't yet realize. He had the truth on his side, and that truth would soon prove itself far more powerful than their prejudice. As the courtroom emptied, leaving behind only whispers and hollow echoes, Theon sat quietly, gathering his scattered thoughts. The tension from the day's opening proceedings lingered in his bones, heavy and oppressive. The glares, murmurs, and judgmental stares had drained him, yet there was a spark within, something he hadn't felt in years. It was the quiet resurgence of a flame he believed extinguished forever, the determination to fight back. He gathered his papers slowly, methodically placing them into his worn leather briefcase. Each sheet represented late nights spent poring over law books in dimly lit libraries and countless hours of research, all fueled by necessity rather than privilege. His fingers brushed against an old photograph tucked between the pages, and his movements froze. Carefully, almost reverently, he drew it out and stared down at the faded image. There, smiling brightly, stood a younger, more hopeful version of himself, proudly standing beside his mother, Claudia, on the day he was accepted to law school. His mother's radiant smile still pierced his heart. That was before everything had fallen apart. Memories rushed forward, vivid, unstoppable. 6 years ago, Theon had been a promising law student at Columbia, respected and admired by professors and peers alike. He was the first from Jefferson Heights, his struggling hometown, to attend such a prestigious school. His family had invested every penny they had, sacrificing everything to send him there, hoping he'd return one day as an advocate for those who, like them, had never truly tasted justice. But all his dreams collapsed overnight during a single, tragic event. A classmate, Brandon Hockstead, the son of a wealthy industrialist, had been killed in a car crash. Thean had tried desperately to save him, pulling him from the wreckage moments before the vehicle exploded. Yet, in the chaos, someone reported falsely that Thean had caused the accident, that he had been reckless, intoxicated even. Despite clear evidence to the contrary, money, prejudice, and whispers of racial bias conspired against him. Within days, he was expelled, his scholarships revoked, his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Thean's family, though loving, had neither the means nor the influence to protect him from this injustice. Shame and disbelief drove him back to Jefferson Heights, his dreams shattered, friendships lost, his family carrying the unbearable weight of shame. His mother passed away 2 years later, never recovering from seeing her only son broken by accusations he did not deserve. Now, in the silent courtroom, gripping the old photograph, Thean felt that same familiar ache, the bitterness of injustice. He'd sworn to leave it behind, never to step foot in a courtroom again. Yet fate, cruel or perhaps compassionate, had forced him back here once more. A sudden voice snapped Thean out of his thoughts. "You surprised me in there, Hale." He turned sharply to see Prosecutor Reed Ambrose leaning casually against the doorframe, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. "Didn't realize you'd actually done your homework." "Almost admirable," Ambrose continued, folding his arms across his chest, projecting superiority. Thean studied Ambrose carefully. Years had passed, yet Ambrose was hardly different from when they'd briefly crossed paths at Columbia, still polished, charismatic, and driven by a hunger for success at all costs. Ambrose, too, had attended Columbia, and even then, had been aligned closely with the same elite circle that had cast Thean out. "Homework isn't a privilege, Ambrose," Thean replied calmly. "It's survival." Ambrose's expression hardened slightly, irritated at the defiance. "Listen, Hale," Ambrose said with quiet menace, stepping closer, voice lowered. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Plead guilty, take a deal. You get probation, everyone moves on. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Thean's jaw tightened, his voice measured but resolute. "You want me to accept guilt for something I didn't do, again? Destroy my name once more, just to protect your friend's interests?" Ambrose leaned forward, voice icy. "Think about it carefully, Thean. You're risking everything." Thean stood slowly, matching Ambrose's stance, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You took everything from me already. There's nothing left to lose." Ambrose regarded him coldly for a long moment before abruptly turning away, striding out of the courtroom, leaving Thean alone again in silence. Thean released the breath he'd unconsciously held, tension leaving his body only briefly before returning stronger. His boldness surprised even himself. There was a time when such confrontation would have terrified him, but today felt different. He no longer feared men like Ambrose, men whose authority rested on the illusion of power rather than truth. Packing away the last of his papers, he exited the courthouse into a humid afternoon. The streets of Sandy River felt suffocating, their familiarity a reminder of the weight he carried. As he walked, a voice called out to him from behind. "Thean. Wait." He turned, surprised. Approaching hurriedly was a young woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes he barely recognized. She was breathless but determined, her gaze filled with curiosity rather than judgment. "My name's Eden Calloway," she introduced herself, slightly out of breath. Her expression was earnest, free from suspicion or contempt. "I saw you in court today. You handled yourself impressively." Thean nodded cautiously, unsure of her intent. "Look," she said quickly, sensing his apprehension, "I'm a journalist from the local paper, the Sandy River Tribune. Something about your case feels wrong. I want to help." He studied her carefully. Years of betrayal had taught him caution, yet her earnestness felt genuine. Still, trust didn't come easily. "Why would you help me?" he asked softly, skepticism evident in his eyes. People here don't usually go against Ambrose or Judge Wakefield. She stepped closer, determination shining clearly on her face. Because I believe you, she said simply. And it's about time somebody in this town heard your side of the story. Theon's shoulders relaxed slightly for the first time since stepping foot in that courtroom. Perhaps he wasn't entirely alone after all. All right, he finally agreed, feeling hope cautiously flicker to life inside him. Let's talk. Together, they walked down the street, two strangers brought together by a shared hunger for truth, a truth that promised to uncover secrets hidden deep beneath Sandy River's polished exterior. As evening shadows lengthened, Theon felt a surge of resolve. This battle would be harder than anything he'd faced before, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself a fragile sense of hope. Perhaps justice wasn't entirely beyond his reach. As darkness fell over Sandy River, Theon sat alone at the small wooden desk in his cramped studio apartment, illuminated only by the yellow glow of a solitary desk lamp. His fingers traced over scattered notes, documents, and legal precedents he had carefully collected over months of painstaking research. Although fatigue tugged at him, sleep seemed impossible, too much was at stake, and his mind refused to rest. The brief interaction with the journalist, Eden, had left him cautiously optimistic. Yet optimism was a luxury Theon rarely allowed himself. He knew better than to trust in miracles. If he was going to win this fight, he had to rely solely on his knowledge of the law and an unwavering commitment to truth. Suddenly, a knock interrupted his thoughts. Theon froze, alert. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. Standing slowly, heart hammering with suspicion, he approached the door carefully, listening closely. "Who is it?" he called out cautiously. "It's Eden," came the quiet yet confident response. Her presence surprised him, though something about her sincerity earlier that day lingered in his mind, compelling him to open the door. Eden stepped inside quickly, glancing nervously around the dimly lit apartment before meeting his eyes directly. She was holding a leather-bound notebook and looked visibly troubled. "Sorry for coming by so late," Eden began, her voice hurried, "but after our conversation earlier, I started digging into Ambrose and Judge Wakefield's previous cases. You were right, something's seriously wrong in this town." Theon shut the door behind her, motioning toward a chair. His pulse quickened. Finally, he was no longer alone in suspecting corruption ran deeper than anyone knew. "What did you find?" he asked urgently, leaning forward, the weariness in his eyes momentarily overshadowed by intense curiosity. Eden opened her notebook carefully, flipping through pages filled with meticulously handwritten notes. "I found at least 5 previous cases where people like you, outsiders, powerless or poor, faced suspiciously convenient accusations. Each time, Ambrose prosecuted, and Wakefield presided. And each defendant accepted plea deals, even when evidence was questionable or clearly tampered with." Theon frowned, absorbing this. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed aloud felt simultaneously validating and sickening. "Why didn't anyone else ever notice this?" he asked, frustration evident in his voice. "How could so many accept injustice quietly?" Eden sighed heavily, eyes filled with empathy. "Fear, Theon. Ambrose and Wakefield have connections to the most powerful people in Sandy River. No one dared challenge them directly, and anyone who tried was quickly silenced. But you're different. You're the first to stand your ground openly." Theon nodded slowly, processing her words. His entire life had prepared him precisely for this moment, a fight for the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous. "There's something else," Eden hesitated briefly, eyes flickering with concern. "I received an anonymous tip earlier tonight. Someone wants to meet us, claims they have crucial information about your case." Theon narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping back. Anonymous informants were rarely reliable and often dangerous, yet he was desperate for any lead. "Do you trust it?" he asked cautiously, studying Eden carefully. "Honestly? I'm not sure," she admitted. "But right now, it's all we have." Silence stretched between them briefly before Theon finally nodded decisively. Then let's meet them, but cautiously. Eden agreed silently, clearly nervous but determined. They quickly decided on a public location, a quiet diner on the outskirts of Sandy River, and left the apartment, moving briskly through the dim streets under cover of darkness. When they arrived at the diner, it was mostly empty except for a lone man seated quietly at a booth near the back. His face was partially hidden beneath a baseball cap, but as Eden and Theon approached, he lifted his head slightly, revealing weary eyes and a tense expression. "Sit quickly," the stranger whispered urgently, glancing nervously toward the windows. "I don't have long." They sat, studying him carefully. He was older, weathered, perhaps in his late 50s, face lined deeply by years of hardship. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "My name is Dorian Cole. I worked as a deputy sheriff here until last year. I was forced out when I started questioning some of Ambrose and Wycliffe's practices." Theon's gaze sharpened immediately. "You know about the manipulation of evidence?" Cole nodded gravely. "I saw it firsthand. Especially in your case. Marsden's attack was orchestrated to silence someone else, and you became the convenient scapegoat." Theon felt anger rise, hot and powerful. His suspicions were confirmed, yet he needed concrete proof, something irrefutable. "Can you prove any of this?" Eden pressed urgently. Cole hesitated, glancing over his shoulder once more before sliding a small USB drive across the table discreetly. "This has surveillance footage that Ambrose tried to erase. It shows clearly that Eric Marsden's attacker wasn't you. But you must be careful, this evidence could put all of us in danger." Theon quickly pocketed the drive, feeling its weight heavy with possibility and risk. "Why help me now?" he asked quietly, fixing Cole with an intense gaze. "Because I've lived with guilt long enough," Cole answered, voice heavy with regret. "I let innocent people suffer for too long, afraid for myself and my family. It stops now. You deserve justice." Suddenly, headlights flashed across the diner windows, briefly blinding them. Cole froze, panic flaring in his eyes. "They've found me," he whispered frantically. "Go, take the back exit. Hurry." Without waiting, Eden and Theon stood abruptly, rushing towards the rear door of the diner. Behind them, Cole remained at the booth, his fate uncertain, as a black car pulled swiftly into the parking lot outside, shadows emerging ominously. They burst into the cool night air, hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. They ran silently down darkened alleyways, finally stopping only when certain no one followed. Breathless, Eden turned towards Theon, eyes wide and fearful, yet fiercely determined. "Are you all right?" she whispered urgently, searching his face. Theon nodded, gripping the drive tightly. His heart still hammered wildly, yet the determination he felt now eclipsed all fear. For the first time since his trial began, victory felt genuinely possible. "Now we have a chance," he breathed, voice steady despite trembling hands. Eden smiled slightly, eyes glistening with relief and determination. Together, beneath the darkened sky of Sandy River, they stood united, resolved not only to fight for Theon's innocence but also to expose the corruption that had poisoned their town for far too long. And though the danger had intensified, Theon knew one thing for certain: he was no longer fighting alone. The morning sun pierced through the worn curtains in Theon's small apartment, casting faint rays onto the paper scattered across his desk. Theon had spent hours examining every second of the footage on the USB drive provided by Dorian Cole. His eyes burned from exhaustion, yet his mind buzzed with newfound clarity and hope. On the video, Eric Marsden's attacker was clearly visible, and undeniably not Theon. This evidence had the power to overturn the case entirely. Eden sat on the edge of the sofa, her laptop open beside her, furiously typing notes. Her eyes were focused, unwavering despite her own lack of sleep. Theon glanced at her briefly, grateful for her determination and bravery. He wasn't used to relying on anyone, but Eden's support had become invaluable. Still, caution kept his guard up, he knew too well the sting of betrayal. Eden, Thean began cautiously, turning away from the computer, we need to be careful how we use this evidence. Ambrose and Wycliffe have influence everywhere. If we reveal it too soon or incorrectly, they'll bury it, and us along with it. Eden stopped typing, turning to face him seriously. Her green eyes reflected deep understanding. I agree. But we can't wait too long either. Every day that passes, Ambrose gains more control. The jury could be completely swayed by then. Thean nodded thoughtfully, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he considered their next move. The video had to be authenticated and introduced into evidence carefully, but how could he manage that without tipping off Ambrose or Judge Wycliffe? Suddenly, Eden's phone buzzed sharply, breaking their tense silence. She glanced at the screen and her expression hardened instantly. What is it? Thean asked immediately, sensing something troubling in her demeanor. It's Dorian Cole, Eden replied quietly, concern evident in her voice. He was arrested last night, charged with obstruction of justice. Ambrose is moving faster than we thought. Thean's stomach tightened painfully. Cole's arrest was a clear message, a warning to them both that Ambrose knew they were closing in. Yet, beneath his anxiety, determination solidified even further. They couldn't let Ambrose silence Cole or anyone else who dared speak the truth. We need help, Thean finally admitted aloud. We can't fight Ambrose and Wycliffe on our own. Eden hesitated briefly, clearly conflicted, before finally speaking. There is one person who might help us, but it won't be easy convincing him. His name is Silas Warren. He was once Ambrose's mentor, a highly respected defense attorney before he left practice. He retired after his daughter disappeared under suspicious circumstances connected to Ambrose's circle. Thean leaned forward, intrigued. Do you think he'd risk getting involved now? Honestly, I don't know, Eden admitted. But if anyone can challenge Ambrose in court, it's Silas. They quickly agreed to approach Warren that afternoon, knowing time was critical. After a brief rest, they drove out of Sandy River toward the secluded countryside, where Warren lived isolated from society. His property was hidden deep in a grove of trees, far from the prying eyes of town. The modest cabin appeared neglected, its paint faded and peeling, surrounded by unkempt grass. Yet there was a sense of peaceful defiance here, a deliberate retreat from the corruption that plagued Sandy River. Thean stepped forward and knocked on the weathered wooden door. After a tense silence, footsteps approached from inside. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, gray-haired man whose fierce blue eyes still held remnants of the formidable lawyer he once was. Silas Warren studied them suspiciously. I'm not interested, he said firmly, preparing to close the door. Wait. Eden pleaded quickly. It's about Ambrose, and the truth behind your daughter's disappearance. Warren froze, eyes darkening instantly. He stared at Eden intensely before finally gesturing them inside. Once seated around a small kitchen table littered with old legal textbooks, Warren listened carefully as Thean and Eden detailed everything they had uncovered. He remained silent, absorbing each revelation, his face unreadable until Eden handed him the USB drive. Silas took it hesitantly, turning it over in his hand. And this video proves your innocence, he finally asked, glancing sharply at Thean. Yes, Thean responded steadily. But it also implicates Ambrose and possibly Wycliffe in deliberately manipulating evidence. Warren's jaw tightened. His eyes revealed a deep, lingering pain, carefully masked beneath layers of bitterness. You realize what you're asking of me, he spoke quietly, his voice strained. Ambrose took everything from me, my career, my reputation, my daughter. I fought him before and lost. Thean leaned closer, meeting Warren's intense gaze without flinching. I understand fear. Ambrose destroyed my life too. But running doesn't change anything. It only empowers men like him. If we don't stand now, who else will? The room grew painfully silent, filled with unspoken emotion. Warren finally broke the silence, his voice low yet resolute. Let me see this footage. For nearly an hour, Warren watched carefully, pausing, rewinding, scrutinizing every detail. With each passing minute, his expression hardened into renewed determination. Finally, he looked up, eyes blazing fiercely. This is more than enough to dismantle Ambrose's case. But Wakefield won't admit it willingly. We'll need witnesses, statements, hard copies, everything backed up. They'll fight ruthlessly, and we'll need undeniable proof. Thean nodded immediately, energized by Warren's willingness to join them. We can gather statements from victims Ambrose previously intimidated. If we unite everyone he wronged, he won't silence us all. Warren stood, suddenly invigorated, retrieving papers and legal forms from cabinets around the cabin. The old lawyer had awakened again, driven by purpose and the chance at justice he once believed lost. Then let's begin immediately, Warren declared firmly. We haven't got a moment to lose. Over the next several days, Thean, Eden, and Warren moved tirelessly, reaching out cautiously to former defendants, gathering sworn testimonies, hidden evidence, and previously silenced truths. Every new voice brought them closer to exposing the corruption within Sandy River's courthouse. Yet danger loomed ever closer. On the third night, as Thean returned home alone after a long day, he sensed he was being watched. Glancing over his shoulder, he spotted a car parked suspiciously down the street, engine idling quietly. Fear prickled down his spine, yet he forced himself to remain calm, quickening his pace without panicking. Suddenly, headlights flashed brightly. The car accelerated rapidly toward him. Thean barely managed to leap aside, narrowly escaping as the vehicle raced past, disappearing quickly into the night. Shaken but alive, Thean understood Ambrose's message clearly: this fight would not be won easily or without cost. Standing alone beneath the flickering streetlights, heart still racing from the narrow escape, Thean felt a powerful resolve solidify deep within him. He would not be frightened into silence again. Ambrose's threats no longer had power over him. Returning home, exhausted yet fiercely determined, Thean contacted Eden and Warren immediately, sharing what had just occurred. They vowed, unified by the urgency of their fight, to press forward more relentlessly than ever before. This battle had become more than just a personal quest for justice. It had become a war for the soul of Sandy River, a war Thean knew he must win, no matter the cost. Late into the evening, Sandy River's streets grew quiet, illuminated only by dim streetlights that barely pierced the shadows. Thean paced silently in Silas Warren's small, cluttered study, his mind restless, relentlessly turning over every detail of the case. Papers lay scattered around him, a tapestry of evidence meticulously woven together over days of tireless effort. Nearby, Eden sat quietly, typing rapidly, her gaze intent and serious, driven by an unshakable desire to expose the truth. Silas sat at his desk, poring over documents, his glasses low on his nose, his face lined with stress but marked by renewed vigor. Yet beneath his apparent determination, a subtle fear lingered, a deep understanding of the powerful forces they were preparing to confront. Finally breaking his silence, Silas removed his glasses, rubbed his weary eyes, and sighed heavily. If we're going to do this right, we need to solidify our evidence beyond any reasonable doubt. Simply having that video won't be enough. Ambrose knows the law inside out, he'll have his own tactics ready. Thean stopped pacing, turning sharply toward him. Then we need something stronger. Witnesses that Ambrose can't intimidate. Evidence even Wakefield can't dismiss. Eden looked up sharply, her fingers freezing over her keyboard as she spoke urgently. We could track down Marcus Tillman. He was there that night, he's in one of the surveillance videos. Ambrose never mentioned him. If we could find him, maybe we can get the full truth. Silas rubbed his forehead thoughtfully, eyes narrowing. Tillman disappeared weeks ago, rumor is Ambrose pressured him to leave town. He might be hard to convince. Thean hesitated briefly, considering the risk. Marcus Tillman was an unpredictable figure, a man with a rough past, someone who'd long since learned never to trust anyone, least of all the legal system. Yet, Marcus had been present the night Eric Marsden was attacked. He was their best chance at corroborating the video's truth. "Marcus knows me," Thean finally said decisively, eyes intense. "We grew up together. If anyone can get through to him, it's me. Let me find him." Silas hesitated briefly, clearly weighing the risk, then nodded solemnly. "Just be careful, Thean. Ambrose and Wakefield know exactly how dangerous Marcus is to their case. They'll do anything to stop us." The following morning, Thean and Eden traveled to the outskirts of town, to a neglected trailer park known as Shady Grove. The area had long been abandoned by Sandy River's respectable citizens, becoming a haven for those who had slipped through the cracks of society. The dusty road was lined with rusting vehicles, stray dogs, and suspicious eyes watching their every move. Finally, they spotted Marcus's trailer, a weathered structure marked by peeling paint and broken windows hastily patched with cardboard. Approaching slowly, Thean knocked firmly on the rusted door, steeling himself for the unpredictable response. The door swung open violently, revealing Marcus Tillman, a tall, heavily built man with haunted eyes and a hostile scowl. "What the hell do you want, Hale?" Marcus growled, clearly tense and suspicious. "Marcus, we just need to talk," Thean responded calmly, raising both hands slowly, indicating no threat. "It's about Eric Marsden." Marcus tensed visibly, glancing quickly over their shoulders, scanning the street cautiously, before reluctantly stepping aside and gesturing them inside. "You've got 2 minutes," Marcus warned sharply, locking the door behind them. The trailer was small, dark, cluttered, a reflection of the chaotic life Marcus led. Thean wasted no time. "We know you saw what happened that night. Eric Marsden's attacker wasn't me, Marcus. You know the truth. Ambrose is setting me up. You can stop this." Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting anxiously between Thean and Eden. He seemed torn, conflicted, clearly wrestling with fear and guilt. He finally shook his head bitterly. "You're crazy. Ambrose and those people, if I testify, I'm dead. You know how it is here." Thean stepped closer, locking eyes with Marcus firmly, his voice softer yet filled with sincerity. "Marcus, I understand you're afraid. I was afraid too. But silence only strengthens them. They destroyed my life once, I won't let them do it again. And if you remain silent, you'll always carry the weight of their guilt. Trust me, I know what that feels like." Marcus hesitated, eyes flickering with internal struggle. After a long silence, his posture finally softened slightly, the hostility fading into something more like reluctant acceptance. "If I do this," Marcus finally spoke, voice low and strained, "they'll hunt me down. Wakefield won't let me walk away." "Marcus, we'll protect you," Eden quickly promised, stepping forward reassuringly. "Your testimony can break this case wide open, expose them publicly. Once that happens, Ambrose won't dare touch you." Marcus stood quietly, the internal struggle clear in his tense posture. Then, after what seemed an eternity, he finally nodded. "All right. I'll testify. But the moment you get your evidence, you have to get me out of Sandy River," he insisted sharply. "I'll give you names, dates, everything you need, but then I'm gone." Relief washed over Thean. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt a genuine sense of triumph. Marcus handed Eden a small handwritten note, outlining his knowledge of the incident. Eden carefully placed it in her bag, knowing its significance. As Thean and Eden prepared to leave, Marcus stopped them abruptly, a quiet warning in his voice. "Be careful, Hale. You think Ambrose and Wakefield are bad now? Wait until they realize you've got me. They won't hesitate to silence any of us." Returning to Silas's home, they wasted no time in laying out Marcus's statement alongside the footage, compiling every detail meticulously. As hours passed, their determination only grew stronger, each piece of evidence becoming another brick in the wall against corruption. Yet, just as optimism began to lift their spirits, Eden's phone rang abruptly, its shrill sound cutting sharply through their concentration. She quickly answered, her face paling rapidly as she listened intently. "It's Cole," she whispered urgently to Theon and Silas, her voice shaking slightly. "They've denied his bail and moved him to county jail. Ambrose is clearly sending a message." Theon's jaw tightened, fists clenching involuntarily. Ambrose's reaction was predictable yet troubling. He was now actively silencing those who dared challenge his carefully constructed web of lies. Turning to Silas, Theon spoke gravely, "We can't wait any longer. We have the testimony. We have the footage. It's time to confront Ambrose and Wakefield head-on. We must bring this evidence to court immediately, publicly." Silas hesitated briefly, knowing the tremendous risks involved. But after exchanging glances with Eden, he finally nodded, his expression resolute. "All right, Theon," Silas finally agreed, a fierce fire igniting behind his tired eyes. "Tomorrow morning, we present everything we have. The entire town must see the truth, before it's too late." The three stood in silent determination, fully aware of the storm ahead, yet ready to challenge the powerful forces arrayed against them. The battle for justice had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. In the days following their meeting with Marcus, tension in Sandy River became almost tangible. Whispers moved swiftly through streets and alleyways, weaving a narrative that shifted slowly from skepticism to curiosity. People began wondering if perhaps the young black man who dared to stand alone against the system might actually be telling the truth. But the truth was a dangerous ally in Sandy River, and Theon felt its weight pressing upon him more heavily than ever. Every evening became an exercise in vigilance, doors locked tight, windows closed, curtains drawn securely. His senses remained perpetually alert, knowing Ambrose would not accept defeat quietly. One evening, as darkness gathered thickly around Sandy River, Theon stepped from Warren's house into the chilly night air. He had spent hours preparing documents, gathering witness statements, and carefully laying out their strategy. Eden had left moments earlier, returning to the newsroom to finalize an explosive article meant to expose Ambrose's corruption publicly. The stakes felt unbearably high, each decision now held life-altering consequences. Theon walked slowly, shoulders heavy with exhaustion, thoughts spinning rapidly as he replayed every detail. A sense of unease had settled deep within him, an intuition sharpened by years spent navigating dangers that others seldom saw. Shadows lengthened along empty streets, accentuating the eerie quiet of a town that seemed poised, waiting for something explosive. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared from behind a parked vehicle, blocking Theon's path. Instinctively, he stepped back, heart racing wildly. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice surprisingly steady despite his nerves. From the darkness stepped two men, unfamiliar but clearly menacing. The taller of the two, a broad-shouldered man with cold eyes, spoke harshly, voice low and threatening. "You just couldn't take a hint, could you, Hale? Ambrose sends his regards. Says you're making trouble where you shouldn't." Theon tensed, muscles coiling defensively. "Ambrose sent you to scare me," he challenged boldly, hoping his defiance might mask the uncertainty he felt. The shorter man sneered, stepping closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, we're past scaring you, Hale. We're here to make sure you understand clearly, this ends now. Tomorrow, in court, you'll plead guilty. You drop your accusations. Walk away quietly, or next time, you won't be walking anywhere." Theon stood his ground, clenching his fists tightly, eyes blazing defiantly. "I won't be silenced. Tell Ambrose he can't intimidate me into submission." Without warning, the taller man lunged forward, his fist connecting painfully with Theon's jaw. The force knocked him sideways, causing him to stumble and fall heavily onto the hard pavement. Stars exploded behind his eyes, sharp pain radiated through his skull. Before he could recover, the second man moved swiftly, kicking him brutally in the ribs. Thean gasped, desperately trying to catch his breath. "You're making a big mistake," the man hissed coldly, leaning over him. "You've got no idea what Ambrose can do to someone like you." Despite agony surging through him, Thean gathered all his strength and looked defiantly into the attacker's eyes. "You won't win this fight," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "You can silence me, but you can't silence the truth." The shorter attacker laughed bitterly, clearly unfazed. "We'll see about that." Suddenly, distant sirens pierced the night's quiet, growing steadily louder. The two men exchanged anxious looks. With a final threatening glance, they quickly vanished into the darkness, leaving Thean alone, injured but alive. He lay motionless for a moment, catching his breath, the cold concrete pressing into his battered body. Pain blurred his thoughts, but the sirens gave him renewed strength. Forcing himself up, he stumbled unsteadily toward the safety of the streetlights. A car screeched to a stop beside him moments later. Eden emerged quickly, horror etched deeply into her face. "Thean. Are you all right?" "What happened?" she demanded frantically, rushing to support him. He managed a weak smile, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "Ambrose sent his message," he whispered bitterly. "He wants me gone." Eden helped him gently into her car, her eyes filled with rage and determination. "We're going to the hospital," she declared firmly, already reaching for her phone to call Warren. "No," Thean stopped her urgently, gripping her arm gently but firmly. "No hospitals. Ambrose controls too many people. We can't trust anyone." She hesitated, eyes pleading, but finally nodded. "Then we go to my place." "But you need help, Thean. This is too dangerous." Driving quickly through backstreets, they arrived at Eden's small house. Inside, Eden gently tended to Thean's injuries, carefully cleaning the blood from his battered face, her fingers trembling slightly. The silence between them was heavy with tension, anger, and unspoken fears. Finally, Eden broke the quiet. "Thean, maybe we should stop. Ambrose won't hesitate to kill you. It's gone beyond a simple trial, this is about your life." Thean raised his head slowly, meeting her eyes with calm determination, despite the bruises already forming on his face. "I can't stop now, Eden. If I surrender, Ambrose and Wycliffe win, not just today, but forever. They destroyed too many lives already. Someone has to end it." She stared at him quietly, fear warring visibly with admiration. Finally, she nodded solemnly, accepting his decision. "Then we fight. Together." They spent the rest of the night carefully documenting the attack, photographing his injuries as further evidence against Ambrose. Warren arrived shortly after midnight, anger burning brightly in his eyes when he saw Thean's condition. Yet, he immediately recognized the opportunity this presented. "They've made a mistake," Warren declared fiercely. "Ambrose is panicking. He fears what we have." By dawn, Thean felt renewed energy coursing through his veins, fueled by pain, anger, and relentless resolve. The physical bruises would heal, but the emotional scars only deepened his determination. Now it wasn't simply about clearing his name, this battle had transformed into a war against the systemic corruption poisoning Sandy River. The first rays of sunlight filtered softly through Eden's window as Thean stood slowly, still sore yet fiercely resolute. "Are you ready for this?" Warren asked gravely, recognizing the gravity of their next move. Thean glanced around the room, seeing in Eden and Warren faces of courage, loyalty, and hope. He felt a surge of newfound confidence, knowing that, despite Ambrose's threats, he wasn't alone. "Yes," he answered firmly, voice strong, gaze unwavering. "More ready than I've ever been." Together, they prepared for the battle ahead, fully aware of the dangers that awaited them. Yet, no matter the cost, they vowed silently to themselves, and to each other, that truth would not be buried beneath Sandy River's corrupted soil ever again. The atmosphere inside Sandy River's courthouse on the final day of the trial was electric. Citizens crowded the courtroom, their hushed whispers blending into a hum of anticipation. News of Marcus Tillman's powerful testimony and the evidence implicating Ambrose and Wycliffe had spread rapidly, shaking the small community to its core. For the first time, the residents of Sandy River felt forced to confront uncomfortable truths they'd ignored for too long. Thean sat quietly at the defense table, composed despite the tension pressing against him. He glanced around briefly, noting the strained expressions on faces that once sneered at him with contempt, now uncertain and anxious. Near the front, Eden sat alongside Silas Warren, her expression confident yet cautious. Her investigative article had just been published that morning, detailing not only the fabricated charges against Thean but the extensive corruption in which Ambrose and Wycliffe were deeply involved. Ambrose sat opposite, outwardly poised, though a subtle unease flickered behind his confident facade. Occasionally, he glanced at Thean, his eyes filled with a cold, quiet fury. Ambrose was cornered, and both men knew it. Judge Wycliffe entered the courtroom abruptly, his steps measured, features carefully neutral. Yet his usual authority seemed fractured, subtly undermined by uncertainty and hidden fear. He had read Eden's article, aware his once unquestioned reputation was now precariously balanced on the edge of ruin. Taking his seat, Wycliffe cleared his throat, attempting a tone of stern authority. "The court will resume proceedings," Wycliffe announced, avoiding eye contact with Thean entirely. "Defense may continue presenting evidence." Thean stood slowly, his movements deliberate, carrying a new sense of confidence. The bruises from his attack were still visible, now badges of his resilience rather than shame. Holding a thick stack of documents, he approached the jury directly, determined to expose Ambrose's and Wycliffe's corruption unequivocally. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice strong, filled with an authenticity that resonated deeply throughout the courtroom. "You've already seen clear evidence proving my innocence, but today you'll witness something even deeper. You'll see proof that this trial is only part of a broader pattern, an abuse of power by Prosecutor Ambrose, aided by complicity from this very courtroom." Wycliffe tensed visibly, his eyes narrowing sharply, yet he remained silent. Thean carefully placed documents before the jury, detailing multiple cases from previous years where innocent individuals had been pressured into accepting unjust plea deals orchestrated by Ambrose and approved by Wycliffe. One by one, Thean calmly presented sworn affidavits from previous victims, individuals silenced, intimidated, and denied justice by the very institution meant to protect them. As each affidavit was read aloud, murmurs spread rapidly throughout the room, shock and anger mingling openly among the spectators. Faces previously skeptical now reflected outrage and betrayal. Ambrose suddenly sprang to his feet, desperate to interrupt. "Your Honor, these claims are irrelevant and prejudicial. This has nothing to do with the current case." Wycliffe hesitated, clearly uncertain how to respond. Thean quickly interjected before Wycliffe could silence him. "Your Honor, these statements establish a clear and ongoing pattern of misconduct by the prosecution, one crucially relevant to my case. It reveals that Ambrose manipulated evidence repeatedly, with this court's implicit support." Wycliffe hesitated, glancing uncomfortably around the courtroom. Finally, forced by public scrutiny, he relented. "Proceed, Mr. Hale." Ambrose sank back into his chair, visibly rattled for the first time, eyes flashing dangerously toward Thean. The carefully controlled persona he had maintained for years was slowly unraveling under the intense gaze of the crowd. Suddenly, the courtroom doors swung open dramatically. Heads turned simultaneously as Dorian Cole walked in, escorted by officers. Despite his haggard appearance from days in custody, Cole's eyes blazed with fierce determination. Thean exchanged a surprised, hopeful glance with Eden, then quickly turned back toward Wycliffe. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Dorian Cole as my next witness. Ambrose sprang up instantly, voice laced with desperation. Objection. Cole is currently in custody, his testimony is tainted, unreliable. But Wakefield, sensing the shifting tides of public opinion, raised a weary hand, cutting Ambrose off abruptly. Denied. Mr. Cole will testify. Dorian Cole took the witness stand calmly, unfazed by Ambrose's threatening glare. Thean approached steadily, feeling adrenaline and tension collide within him, yet his composure remained unwavering. Mr. Cole, Thean began clearly, can you describe your former occupation and why you left? Cole spoke firmly, resolutely, I served as deputy sheriff for Sandy River until last year, when I began investigating cases handled by Ambrose. After uncovering multiple instances of falsified evidence and witness intimidation, Ambrose had me forced out and publicly discredited. He destroyed my career because I refused to remain silent. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ambrose's calm shattered, anger and panic flared openly across his face, his confident mask falling away. Can you confirm that you provided me with a video proving my innocence? Thean asked directly. Yes, Cole answered resolutely, looking straight at the jury. And I obtained it directly from police archives, hidden deliberately by Ambrose. It proves beyond any doubt that Thean Hale is innocent, and Ambrose knowingly suppressed it. Ambrose abruptly stood again, face flushed with rage. Your Honor, these accusations are ridiculous, this witness is clearly biased. Wakefield banged the gavel sharply. Order. Let him finish. Cole continued boldly, undeterred. Ambrose and those connected with him, including you, Judge Wakefield, have systematically used the law to punish the innocent and protect your allies. Your reign of injustice has ruined too many lives. It ends today. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Wakefield, visibly shaken, could not respond immediately. Ambrose leaped up, shouting, losing all self-control. These are lies. This entire testimony is fabricated. Thean turned calmly toward the judge, seizing the moment decisively. Your Honor, based on this testimony and the substantial evidence presented, I demand immediate dismissal of all charges against me, and a formal investigation into Prosecutor Ambrose's misconduct. Wakefield stared down at Thean, visibly shaken, as if truly seeing him for the first time, not as a powerless outsider, but as a formidable opponent whose courage had exposed his own failings. After a tense, agonizing silence, Wakefield finally spoke, his voice quiet yet heavy with resignation. The evidence presented here today is compelling and disturbing, he admitted slowly, barely audible yet unmistakably sincere. The charges against Thean Hale are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Additionally, this court will initiate an independent inquiry into all allegations against Mr. Ambrose. Gasps and exclamations filled the courtroom. Relief washed over Thean, his knees suddenly weak with a flood of emotion. Eden smiled triumphantly, tears in her eyes, while Silas Warren nodded approvingly, pride evident on his weary face. Ambrose sat utterly defeated, eyes wide in disbelief, the mask of invincibility finally shattered beyond repair. Wakefield stood abruptly, leaving the courtroom swiftly, his authority forever tarnished by his complicity. Amid the chaos, Thean stood quietly, feeling a deep, overwhelming sense of victory and redemption. The bitter years of humiliation, fear, and silence melted away, replaced by a sense of pride and liberation he had long forgotten. Though the battle was far from over, for the first time in years, justice had triumphed in Sandy River. Thean Hale had finally reclaimed not only his freedom, but his voice. 6 months had passed since the trial concluded, yet Sandy River was still recovering from the seismic shift that had shaken its foundations. The revelations had torn apart old alliances, exposing long-hidden truths and forcing its residents to confront uncomfortable realities. Ambrose's downfall had left a void, power once absolute was now scattered, fragmented. But for Thean Hale, life was slowly being rebuilt from those fragments, piece by piece. It was a bright September afternoon, the air tinged with the crispness of autumn as leaves drifted gently across the street. Thean stood outside the freshly painted building on Main Street, gazing thoughtfully at the polished brass nameplate mounted neatly beside the door. Hale and Warren, attorneys at law. Thean's heart swelled with quiet pride, tempered only by the memory of how hard-fought this victory had been. Beside him stood Silas Warren, dressed in a sharp suit, face etched with cautious satisfaction. The older attorney's return from retirement had caused another ripple in Sandy River, signifying the genuine change sweeping through the small town. "You ready for this?" Silas asked gently, noticing Thean's lingering hesitation. "Ready as I'll ever be," Thean replied softly, smiling with quiet determination. A familiar voice interrupted their reflection. Eden approached from the street, smiling warmly, her fiery hair catching sunlight. She had become a powerful ally and friend, her relentless journalism continuing to illuminate corruption across the region. Eden embraced Thean briefly, joy radiating warmly from her eyes. "This is just the beginning, you know," Eden reminded them gently. "There's still a lot of work ahead." Thean nodded knowingly, a quiet resolve settling deep inside him. Ambrose's removal had been only the first step. Many victims still sought justice, the scars he had left in his wake would take years to fully heal. As the three stood together, quietly savoring the moment, a car pulled slowly into the parking lot. Thean turned curiously, recognizing the vehicle instantly, a black Lincoln sedan he'd seen countless times parked outside the courthouse. The driver's door opened, and Judge Edmund Wakefield stepped out slowly, his appearance drastically different from the imposing figure Thean once faced in court. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of public disgrace, and his eyes, once sharp and disdainful, now appeared humbled, almost weary. Thean, Silas, and Eden exchanged quick, wary glances as Wakefield approached them. Stopping several feet away, the former judge stood awkwardly, searching for words. His gaze fixed on Thean, sincerity evident despite his discomfort. "Thean," Wakefield finally began, his voice quiet yet steady. "I never thought I'd say this, but I owe you an apology. What I did, or allowed to happen in my courtroom, was inexcusable." Thean listened silently, emotion flickering across his face. Wakefield continued, clearly struggling yet resolute. "I was blinded by arrogance, pride, and my desire for acceptance among powerful men. Ambrose used that weakness to corrupt me, and I willingly turned a blind eye. You forced me to see the ugliness I allowed to thrive, forced me to confront my own failures." Thean studied Wakefield carefully, weighing sincerity against past actions. Finally, he nodded slowly, granting a quiet forgiveness. "Justice isn't defined by who holds power," Thean replied firmly, "but by how it's used. I hope you never forget that." Wakefield extended his hand cautiously, which Thean accepted briefly but firmly. The judge's gesture symbolized the final collapse of old prejudices, the surrender of arrogance to humility. Without another word, Wakefield turned slowly, walked back to his car, and drove away quietly, leaving behind not only the law firm but also the darkness of his past mistakes. Thean exhaled deeply, turning back to Silas and Eden, his eyes clear and unburdened. "We have work to do," he reminded them softly. Inside the new office, the three began sorting through files, preparing for the difficult legal battles awaiting them. Over the coming weeks, the firm rapidly gained recognition as Sandy River's beacon of justice, an office open to everyone, regardless of their wealth or background. People who had once feared the courthouse now saw Hale and Warren as their strongest protectors, allies unafraid to challenge injustice head-on. Yet challenges persisted. Threats continued, anonymous calls, vandalized property, intimidation attempts. But none succeeded in deterring Thean, who now drew strength from his community, from Silas's wisdom, and from Eden's unyielding courage. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived at their office, neatly sealed, bearing a prison's official stamp. Thean opened it cautiously, heart racing at recognizing Ambrose's handwriting. The words inside were brief but powerful. Hail. I underestimated you. You defeated me, but don't think this ends here. Power is never destroyed, it simply changes hands. Watch yourself carefully. Ambrose, Theon stared thoughtfully at the note, aware Ambrose's threat lingered, even behind bars. Yet instead of fear, he felt renewed resolve. Placing the letter calmly aside, he turned back to Eden and Silas, speaking with unshakable determination. Ambrose was wrong. Justice isn't about power or wealth. It's about resilience, standing up again and again, no matter how often they try to silence us. Eden smiled warmly, reaching for Theon's hand, her support steadfast. You've already proven that, she said softly. And we'll keep proving it together. Months passed swiftly as the law firm continued taking high-profile cases, boldly confronting corruption, championing justice, and steadily rebuilding trust among Sandy River's people. Theon's reputation grew rapidly, transforming him from an outcast to a respected defender of truth, a man who refused to compromise his principles, regardless of the risk. One evening, as twilight settled softly over the town, Theon stood alone at the office window, gazing out thoughtfully. A gentle knock startled him from contemplation, and Eden entered quietly, smiling warmly as she approached. You know, Theon, she spoke softly, stepping beside him, you've changed this town forever. People here now understand that silence isn't their only option. You've given them hope. Theon smiled quietly, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulder, looking out toward a town that now seemed less hostile, more open. Hope wasn't something I ever expected to give, or receive, he admitted softly. But I won't stop until Sandy River becomes a place where justice isn't just a word, but something real, tangible for everyone. She leaned against him comfortably, her voice soft yet certain. And you won't have to face it alone, ever again. As evening fell, casting gentle shadows over Sandy River, Theon felt at peace, perhaps for the first time. Despite hardship still ahead, despite Ambrose's lingering threats, he understood clearly now that justice was not an easy battle. It was demanding, relentless, but ultimately achievable. Together, standing in the warmth of evening's fading light, Theon, Eden, and Silas silently promised each other, and themselves, to never allow fear or injustice to control their lives again. In that promise, Theon finally found what he had long sought, a sense of purpose, community, and unbreakable hope. In that quiet moment, Sandy River felt different, no longer oppressive, but full of possibility. For the first time in years, Theon Hale felt truly free, at peace not only with himself but with the world around him. Justice had finally found its voice, loud and clear, and it would never be silenced again.